Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. My name is Peter Englert. We are here with our remarkable producer, Nathan Yoder, and my illustrious co-host, Aaron Mercer. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm well. Good to be on the podcast with you, Peter.
I know.
I'm excited about this topic today.
Well, folks, if we can't answer this question, then we have titled this podcast the wrong title. So we are asking the question, why ask why? We are here with our friend Travis Dickinson. He wrote the book Wandering Towards God, which is about doubt and some of our current topics that we're having about faith. And we're really looking forward to kind of asking this. And I think it's really important, Aaron, because I think sometimes in the church we've been either afraid to ask why, or we've felt judged to ask why, or there's just a number of feelings. And I think that this question really helps us realize the purpose of our podcast and even the purpose of growing and developing our faith.
Yeah, I'm excited about this conversation. I think that Travis has a lot of great insights for us. I'm looking forward to talking with him. But I agree, Peter. I think there's so many reasons to ask why, and sometimes people can feel nervous about asking why. I think it'll be interesting to talk about how do you ask why in a productive way. That's also I think a good conversation point. So anyhow, we don't want to have the whole podcast without talking to Travis. We really should include him in our conversation. So, but I know that Travis, I know you and Peter have talked a bit in the past, but this is the first time we're talking, and I would love to just learn a little bit more about your story. Can you share a little bit with me and with our listeners more about how you came to be so interested in this subject, and give us some career story along the way too. You did a lot of studies as well.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this one. So my story, so the book definitely comes out of my story. It connects up a lot of my academic studies as well as my own sort of personal, journey of faith and so on. So I grew up in a very, very Christian home, and not in a bad, in all good ways. My folks were in the ministry. It was a ministry started by my great grandfather. My grandfather was the director of the ministry, and my dad was something like assistant director or something. And so we went to church on Sunday. We went to Christian school. Like I said, it was pretty much it's a sort of embarrassingly old age when I realized that there were non-Christians out there, because my world was just so Christian. And that was that's not a bad thing. I grew up getting to see people's lives changed by the gospel, and it had a profound effect on me. But it all kind of came crashing down a little bit for me, just intellectually, in seminary. Actually, I was sitting in a seminary classroom, and it was a sort of religious studies course. And it's hard to even articulate exactly what the objection was that I dealt with, but it was something like, why do I think, I grew up as a Christian, why should I think, it's sort of like, what's the chance that I would be believing the right view out of all this, this huge catalog of different religious views? What's the chance that I would have just been born into the right view? And what hit me was that what I realized is I don't believe that Christianity is true because it's true, if that makes sense, on the basis of truth, on the basis of reason. I did believe it was true, and I very sincerely believed it was true. I'd given my life. I was going to seminary, headed into ministry and so on. So I sincerely believed, but I realized that the basis of my belief was not truth. It was not reason and evidence and so on. And so this kind of really threw me. It was this very sudden thing where I was really, really struggling with that. And so for me, I had to lean in, right? A lot of people sort of come to that crisis and they run away, or they just sort of walk away. And I think part of the reason for that is because the church, unfortunately, we don't have enough podcasts like this one where the why questions are encouraged. What I say in the book and often say is that churches, unfortunately, just aren't safe places to doubt your faith oftentimes. And I think that's a real shame. I mean, it should be like where we run when we have doubts. We should be running to church. And too often we're told to just sort of knock it off or stop doubting, as if that, works. Right. It can work sometimes for a little while, but usually the doubts, at least for me, come back, and they often bring friends. And you're kind of in this worse place. And so anyway, but my story is I leaned into these doubts and questions, and I found a lot of evidence, like lots and lots of evidence, lots and lots of answers to my questions. And it's not to say I've got everything figured out by any stretch. And there was some really difficult wrestling and kind of coming to that place. But the short story of it all is that I just found a lot of answers to my questions, and sort of found myself with a much stronger faith. And so the very thing that I think a lot of people are worried about when asking the why questions, and when they are finding themselves struggling at doubt, is that they're going to lose their faith. And my story, my testimony is, in a way, that, look, it kind of provides this awesome opportunity to lean in and find the truth and find knowledge. And as a result of that, you come to this place of greater faith. And that's kind of the irony there. So yeah, I just sort of, in that, it was such a powerful experience that I really kind of devoted myself to this, pursuit. And, some of us have the great privilege to get paid, not well, but, get paid to pursue answers and to write and to teach. And so I get to now teach at Dallas Baptist University. Been here just a little over a year, and get to teach philosophy with a great group of students.
I want to back up, Aaron, if it's okay. So if I hear you right, the inflection point for your doubt was, I just so happened to be born into, at the very least, a third generation Christian home. Like, what if I was born in India and became a Hindu, or what if I was born in China and I was living the Confucian. So walk us through that, because I think that's something, I don't know, I'm just kind of curious of how you kind of developed and kind of moved on, from that.
Yeah. As I've reflected, since then, of course, in the moment, it's hard to even articulate what you're feeling, much less get it all figured out. And so as I've reflected since then, I think it really was that. It was sort of like, as I'm learning about other religious traditions, and if I'm, honestly, I think too that it felt in the seminary classroom setting that we were just sort of dogging on these other religious views and giving our Christian views a little bit of a pass. Now, that might have just been me, but it kind of felt that way. And I think that does happen in Christian circles, where we just sort of assume Christianity's true and these other views are just, and you almost in an almost mocking tone, like, talk about these crazy beliefs that people have. And, we don't realize what it sounds like when we start talking about the doctrine of the Trinity, or, the resurrection of Jesus or something, how crazy that might sound to others. And so I think that was definitely part of it, is it just felt like we were giving ourselves a pass. And then I think what it brought to mind for me was that I've been giving my own Christian view a pass for my whole life. And that, again, it's that basis issue. Like, again, is why this podcast is so perfect in a way, is because I, for the first time, I think, genuinely asked why. Like, why do I believe? And as I took an honest look at that, I realized it was more to do with my parents, my family, right? Because there's a lot of pressures on ministry kids, especially, and pastors' kids and missionary kids, because it's a big deal if they were to say, hey, you know what, I just don't think I believe anymore. I mean, I don't think I would have been turned out. In fact, I'm confident I wouldn't have been turned out from my home or my family or anything like that, or ostracized. But it would have been a big deal, right? The great grandson of the founder has, renounced Christianity or whatever in that circle, And so there's a lot of pressure on pastors' kids and missionary kids to believe. And I think that there's, you see a lot of these kids will walk away from the faith, or at least struggle with their faith, I think, because they're not always led to believe again, as I said, on the basis of truth. And so it was that realization sitting in that seminary classroom was that the basis of my belief was like social pressure, family pressure, again, well-intentioned, but it wasn't because I knew it was true or had good reason to believe it was true. And so that's where I felt no different from someone growing up in a, say, Buddhist context or a Muslim context or something to that effect. And so that's where I had to ask why. Like I had to say, like, why think this is true? And we can do that, you know, kind of in a Sunday school sort of attitude of like, yeah, why is this true? Where we're all, you know, Christians sitting around sort of asking that lightly. And then I think we can ask that deeply where it's painful almost, like it's scary, because we're now really asking where there's the genuine possibility of saying like, actually, as I've looked into it, turns out this isn't true. That's the why question that I had to ask.
So as you've come along the way here, thank you for sharing all that, by the way.
Yeah.
But as you've gone along the way, I looked at your bio before we started this, and you've had a number of degrees that as you've been pursuing the answers. I loved how you framed it on your webpage about, you know, you didn't find all the answers there, so you went to get a degree somewhere else. I mean, I love it.
Right.
But as you were going through that process, I have a question about a couple different ways you might ask questions. You know, what was a question that you really thought was a good question that kind of, I don't want to say ruffled feathers, but like got people to off their kilter a little bit, so they had to think about things, whether it was in your seminary class or schooling after that. Maybe it's something you ask your students now, I don't know. And also on the flip side of that, what's a question that maybe you raised, maybe you didn't, but was really perhaps one of the most profound, deeply impactful for you as you wrestled with it along your faith journey? So I guess I'm just curious about it. You know, what are some of the nature of the questions that you've had over the years?
Yeah. So the irony for me was, I think, that the initial struggle turned out to not be very difficult, because as you look into other religious traditions, really quickly you find out that, and I don't want to be, you know, too sweeping in what I'm going to say, but I don't think you don't have the same emphasis on reason and evidence in, say, Eastern traditions, religious traditions especially, as you do in, say, the Christian tradition, right? So you have the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 saying that, look, if the resurrection didn't happen, our faith is literally in vain. Like, don't believe it. And so, whereas, you know, so in a way you can sort of say like, well, then I have, my task is to look, what's the evidence for the resurrection? Did this actually happen? Because if it's not, then I can sort of go do something else. And so, whereas that same sort of like, you know, throwing down the gauntlet in a way that Paul does there in the chapter, does not occur in Eastern traditions. It's not like, you know, there are apologetics departments, you know, in Buddhist institutions. I mean, maybe there are, but I didn't come across anything like that. And it was much more of an emphasis on like what worked for you, or if you can find this sort of, you know, sort of clearer headspace or a kind of enlightenment or those sorts of things. And then even in like, say, Islam and some of the other, you know, so-called Western traditions, I just found the evidence really inadequate. What they were pointing to just didn't move me. And again, like I recognize there's probably biases figuring in and so on, but when I tried to look at it, which I think everybody, you know, needs to do, and sort of a big point of the book is to say, like, we really just need to ask questions about these views. And as much as I want Christians to ask why, I want Muslims to ask why, and I want Mormons to ask why, and I want, you know, Buddhists and the rest, because again, I just, when I tried to look as honestly as I could, I just found the Christian view to, it was kind of like it wasn't a fair fight, right? It was sort of like the Christian view from its beginning has valued evidence and reason and truth and knowledge in a way that these other traditions just haven't. And so that one was fairly easy to kind of get to, but it was sort of like set me on this path to now ask these really big, what I call big questions. And so I think one of the biggest is the hiddenness question. That's probably the one that I do come back to from time to time, where the worry is, why isn't God more obvious? Right? If there is an all good, all powerful God that loves us and wants us to follow and believe in him, then you'd expect him to kind of be a little more obvious than he is. Like there's a sense in which he's hidden. And so that's one that, you know, I have come back to from time to time, and this ends up being a chapter in the book. So the answer to the question is really the structure of the book is to set out the first 6 chapters, talk about kind of how to do this well, not just doubt well. By the way, too, I want to say this too, because there's a number of books out there on doubt, but the book is as much focused on how to ask questions, even if we're not doubting, as it is on doubting and stuff. So it was definitely a book that I think will help someone who's struggling with doubt, but I hope to provide a way to just sort of approach faith that's one of, asking why again. So then in the latter part of the book, I cover I try to model like what it would look like to ask some really big and deep and difficult questions, and the hiddenness one is one of them there.
So, Aaron and I gave each other knuckles because our pastor is actually going to be preaching on 1 Corinthians 15. So we'll take bingo where we can get it. That's his Easter passage. So let me kind of take a specific situation. So we're an hour outside of Buffalo, and at the recording of this podcast, every story, sports or not, is on Damar Hamlin. And for those listening to this years later, Damar Hamlin is this football player. It's in the middle of the Cincinnati game, gets literally tackled in the right spot. His heart stops. He literally dies on the field. They bring him back to life. He's in the hospital in a coma, and everybody starts saying, we need to pray for Damar. And it's funny because in culture right now, like people will say things like thoughts and prayers aren't enough. So like everybody is saying, pray for Damar. And in praying for Damar, by the recording of this podcast, he's been taken from Cincinnati to Buffalo. He's probably going to get let out of the hospital. He has this, as our sportscasters say, this Disney moment where he asks the question, who won? And the doctors are like, you won, you're alive. And so as I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about that situation where we're recording this podcast when there's this like huge openness to prayer. And even as a pastor, I'll just be honest, it's like, this has happened before. This is like, it's a crazy medical problem, but people have come back to it. But what I'm confused of, which I would need to talk to, if you didn't think thoughts and prayers were going to help, did it really help? Did you reason yourself out? I don't know. Process with me, because maybe I'm doubting, maybe I'm one of your students, because all like thoughts and prayers weren't important over here, but they're important over here. And it seems like the doctors did their job and they did exceedingly well, but we're still praying.
Right. Yeah. We are definitely, so something that I think about a lot actually is, especially connected to apologetics, is to what degree do we need intellectual answers always? And I'll try to connect this up with what you're asking. Because I think that, apologetics tends to major on like, let me give you 47 arguments with scientific evidence and historical evidence and all kinds of things. And there you go. Now, don't you believe? And people are saying no. And I think that apologetics needs to just be deeper than that, because I really, and I think C.S. Lewis is, of course, the patron saint of apologetics in a way, and somebody that we look to, but he did do that side of it, but he also did imaginative stuff. And he recognized, as, Pascal did, as Augustine did before him, that there really truly is a God-shaped hole I think, in all of our hearts, where we seem sort of fitted to sort of believe in God, to follow, there is that just seems to be part of our human nature. And so I think that sort of response, in a way, of just, people breaking out in prayer. I mean, I didn't see this, but somebody mentioned to me that even on ESPN, the commentator said a prayer on national television for Hamlin. And so, so one thing is, I think that, there probably is a way in which people were wanting to just communicate their love and care for this player and so on. And what are you going to do? Just say good luck, hope it works out, like they're going to something that's a little more heartfelt is like, I'll pray for you. But I don't know, I guess part of me thinks that, like, that sort of natural, it's easy to say God doesn't exist and I'm an atheist and I'm this or that. And then, but do our lives reflect that worldview? And I just think so often they don't. I mean, there's the kind of like, difficult question I think every atheist needs to ask themselves is, what would my life look like if I lived consistently with the non-existence of God? And if that means for them that there's no such thing as morality, if there's no such thing as meaning and purpose, and then of course something like that, what's the point of prayer if you're atheist and so on? And I think that there's this, issue of consistency. And a lot of people have pointed this out along the way. William Lane Craig has a great article. Actually, it's a chapter of his Reasonable Faith book that says, the title is something like the absurdity of life without God. And it's a really great essay. I recommend it. I think you can find it online. And he makes that point at a certain point in that essay where he says, if you live consistently with your atheism, you'll be unhappy. But if you're happy, then you're going to have to live inconsistently with your atheism. And so anyway, I really do think that reflects this way in which we have been sort of fitted for, following and worshiping God. It's just this sort of natural part that sort of comes out in us when we're not in the philosophy classroom or whatever, or wherever we would be, defending atheism. We really just live like theists.
That's interesting. Yeah. I think that lends itself to the need to, at the very beginning, have to be able to ask why questions, even ask the question in the first place. I mean, whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, right. It's easy just not to think about things. But I am curious, when you are having, whether it was through your studies, you've been to both, you grew up in a Christian environment, you've been to Christian schools, you've been to secular schools, you're teaching now. What have you seen as helpful for either yourself as you're trying to ask why questions, or as you're helping others? I mean, who honestly, not people who don't want to think, but people who have gotten to the point where they actually want to ask a why question, but how do you get them to ask a why question constructively? Like, I could imagine, it's easy to ask a question sometimes and feel good that you asked the question. But it's a different thing to really be seeking an answer. At the same time, maybe not knowing how to get to the answer. How do you help this process along? How did you help yourself?
Right. So first of all, what everybody needs to do is listen regularly to this podcast.
All right.
Right. So, I think one of the things that I always say is that we need to take our time. There's a way in which when we start to have these really difficult questions, we feel like we've sort of stumbled on something, and that like life needs to just, grind to a halt while we get this figured out. And one of the most important points that I think I make or try to make is that faith and doubts are not contrary states. So you can have 100% faith in the truth of Christianity and be doubting and experiencing doubts. And so I try to motivate this possibility by thinking about getting on an airplane. Right, because there's a lot about an airplane that I don't understand if I'm honest. Like in fact, I probably know very little. I mean, I can kind of talk about lift, but it's going to be pretty elementary. And so, I can imagine myself being in the airport, having some really serious doubts about how a craft made of metal that 747 weighs in at about 1 million pounds, how that can drive down a little road and then lift off into the atmosphere and cruise at 6 miles off the planet, right? It's crazy. It's like crazy if you think about it. And so I could be having some serious doubts about that, but I always think that, man, I could be sitting there doubting that that's a good idea. And then when they call my number, especially if we're headed to someplace fun, with the beach and that kind of thing, I'm getting on the airplane. In fact, I could be sitting on the airplane, doubting the airplane. And I think that's a pretty beautiful picture of the Christian journey in a way, is that that's just, I really think par for the course in a way. Like it is part of discipleship that we would ask the deep and difficult questions. I think it's a crucial part of discipleship. But when you ask deep and difficult questions, it almost always causes some struggle, right? And that's all I think doubt is just having some bit of intellectual struggle or tension where you're just kind of not sure how to navigate the answer. And so one of the big things that I hope to do with the book and when I talk about this is diffuse a little bit, like the pressure that we feel when we're doubting. Because I want to say, and I always try to work this in at some point in an interview, is to say, if for your listeners out there that if they are doubting their faith, I want them to know that they're normal. Like that's part of discipleship. It's okay. Now we don't want to stay there, and that's the important thing. I think some sort of I don't know who they are. I guess like celebrity pastors or online personalities are sometimes celebrating doubt, I think, too much, as if that's the destination, as if that's the goal. And I want to say clearly that doubt is not the destination, but it can be, to use that metaphor, it can be an important stop off along the journey sort of thing. And so it's okay. It's okay. In fact, probably if you're doubting your faith, right, you're probably more courageous in a way, like more honest than some of your peers, because I think it can be really lonely to doubt your faith too. You're sort of looking around wondering like, why isn't everybody asking these questions? Like, why do they acting like they've got it all figured out? And the reality is they don't have it all figured out, but they may just not be quite as honest as you are if you're asking these really deep and difficult questions. And so that's one of the big things that I'm trying to do, is just to say it's normal and it's okay, but we do need to lean into these questions. And so when we do, so the first thing to say is to take your time, take it one step at a time, one question at a time. Don't try to get it all figured out, by the weekend. For me, some of these questions, like the hiddenness question, as I mentioned, or the problem of evil, like these are really big questions, and they're ones that I've wrestled with for probably now. I mean, it was about 20 years ago that I was in seminary doubting my faith, and so it's been. I think it was 2003. So yeah, it's 20 years ago officially that I've been wrestling, and I don't always. Sometimes I feel like, okay, I think I've got a really good answer. The other days it's sort of like, no, I think I need to work on that some more. And so don't be in too much of a rush. The second thing is do it in community. I think that's really important and really powerful. And I have a real broad sense of community. So the absolute ideal is if you have somebody that's further along, a mature Christian who has gone through this, asked the same sorts of questions, that will walk with you through it. That's ideal. I just don't think that's always, not everybody has that for them. So there's a lot of books out there, though, and there's a lot of books beyond, of course, just the book that I'm promoting today. that you want that have asked these questions. And I always say this to my students and to others that, man, the day and age we live in, there are so many resources out there now along these lines, along, sort of apologetics and things. And I have heard people say this is sort of the golden age of apologetics because we just have so much, and you have so much at so many different levels. So if you want to have like your the back of your head blown off by high academic, every sentence is a struggle, you can find those books. They're probably not the most popular, but you can also find some really great books that are much more accessible, and you can even find books that are written for kids and teens and others. There's even an iPhone app. I mean, good grief, right? We've got a lot of resources available to us today. And so that's community too. And so read the C.S. Lewis and J. Warner Wallace and William Lane Craig and others that have just such good resources out there, and walk with them through these questions. I also do think that it's important to talk to people who believe differently. Now, be careful with that. Again, like sort of take that slowly and so on. But I think it's been just so helpful for me to talk to people who don't believe in Christianity or believe in a different religious tradition. For me to say, well, like, here's how I think about this. What do you think? And just not a debate. Don't do this on Twitter. It's not going to go well. Do this as best you can face to face or some context like that where you can just sort of sit down as friends and dialogue partners and just share your respective positions. You're not trying to, win a debate or anything like that. You're just trying to say, here's how I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And they give you their honest opinion. Like, that's just fun. I mean, honestly, that's good fun. And it's so helpful for kind of seeing where the gaps are, where the weak spots are, and helping you to sort of shore up, the sort of basis for your beliefs and so on.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Peter, on that one?
Yeah.
So how do you help your students? I mean, I feel like Twitter debates, just to use a phrase, is so common in our culture now, not just on Twitter, but in other places too. How do you help your students or others who might come to you avoid that? Like, I feel like sometimes, there can be worry about some questions that are asked more to make a point about the question itself versus actually pursuing some sort of resolution. Like, how do you help people get past that when it's so prevalent around us of just people spouting off in very short sentences whatever it is they want to say?
And can I add one thing to Aaron's point? Because like we've talked about deconstruction, you can even define that. There's the philosophical deconstruction, then there's this modern idea of deconstruction. But I feel like one of the things, and I say this more for our listeners to give them grace, is a lot of these questions that Aaron's even asking and you're asking and I'm asking, like they should have been done when you're 13 and 14. And you're in this safe place. But we live in this time that, like, we have the Twitter spout offs, and we end up, they get to you, and you're like, thanks, pastors and school teachers and everybody. Yeah. Thank you for now. This is the first. So, on to Aaron's question, which is about how do we do this well, not just on Twitter. I think that's what you were kind of asking.
Yeah, and so I guess it probably goes back to the productive conversation, which you were already answering. But I wonder. How you can help people avoid that in the context that we're in now.
And I'd even add to that, how do you do it sooner?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. Do you want us to add any more questions on here? Because we can do that if we want to.
You got a PhD.
Maybe 3 more.
There you
go. No, and let me say this before I forget, because I think this might be part of what Peter's asking. Because my wife and I, we have 4 kids, and we're in the teenager and preteen stage. So pray for us now. But we're in that stage, and so we are like living it, like we're right in the midst of it. And so one of the things that we do with our kids is we try to have a kind of family time each day, to end the day and just pray together and if we can work it in, we'll do a sort of devotional time and so on. And one of the things my wife and I have just said over and over to them is like, look, any questions on the table, you can ask us any question. We don't ever want them to get out of our home and, go on to college or whatever else and feel like they weren't able to ask us. Mm-hmm. And so they will ask some wild questions. Sometimes they won't ask anything and it's just, they just want to go to bed kind of thing. But they will ask some wild questions and we just try to discuss it as a family and that kind of thing. The other thing is with my kids, it's a goal of mine that they would not be unaware of some of the bigger questions out there. And so I don't want them to find themselves on a college campus somewhere, say in a biology class, and all of a sudden somebody like brings up the problem of evil or something, and and they just are surprised because they've never heard it before. Like I want those sort of major objections to feel really familiar, because we have already led them. Again, not to say that they'll get it all figured out, because they won't, because they're just not that motivated right now. Things are pretty safe and good and so on, but again, I want it to feel familiar so that when they're in that place, they don't feel like, oh, I've been lied to for my whole life. There are some really hard questions here and so on. Okay, so that's kind of the family thing, and I think how to do it sooner. I think it really goes best in the home, and of course, for student pastors and so on. I mean, if they're not doing some exposure to apologetics at some point, right, they really need to think about that. And the really interesting thing, if you look at it statistically, so we have lots of students that get to college and they walk away from their faith. I mean, the numbers are just horrifying. It's something like 60 to 80% of students are walking away from the faith, or walking away from the church, I should say, not necessarily the faith. But they're just no longer attaching themselves to church in college. And there's Barna studies and all kinds of studies out there that confirm that it is indeed that high. But the really interesting thing is when they've studied at what point do they decide to walk away, it's not high school, it's actually junior high and even sometimes younger than that. And so in junior high, they are making the decision to walk away from the church in college. It happens in college, but it's decide. So that should motivate every children's pastor, student pastor to make sure that it doesn't have to be all the time, of course, but that there are, these seasons where you walk your students through some of this material and again, just allow for questions, bring in people that can, handle them if the pastor doesn't feel comfortable doing it, or a panel discussion or whatever. All those things are great. And I've been part of all those things and love doing them. Okay. Now to Twitter. So I think it is a real art, honestly, to be able to have a dialogue with someone with whom you disagree. And Twitter, again, is the opposite of that. It's kind of how to have a bad conversation, because you can't know, somebody's sort of tone and the way that they're saying it, what they're emphasizing, and it's just like set up to be misunderstood and to get. I always make the joke that when you read Twitter and other social media sites, it feels like someone's yelling at you always, just because of how it's set up. Like, are you yelling at me? So I think I would just recommend to not have those discussions on social media, probably, because I just don't think that they typically go well. And I have had a few people that I tried to sort of have that conversation with, and it ended badly, and we no longer are necessarily connected, and so that's a real shame. So I think it's just better to do that in person, either face to face, of course, is best. I usually like to have a cup of coffee involved in that mix, or on the phone or Zoom call or whatever. And one of the most important things, I think, is to ask questions, to listen and ask questions. And so the reason why, I like watching debates, when it's like, a Christian or atheist or whoever, I like watching those, and they can be really informative and so on. But the reality is they almost never convince anybody, even of like smaller, kind of like smaller points that they almost should agree with. They still don't even agree with those points. But when when you just sit down with someone and they say, here's my view, here's my thoughts. And then you say, well, why do you think that? Or how do you connect this and that? And so on. Like, that is just so fun. Again, it's like, that's what we do. That's what we should be doing with people. That's just how to have a relationship in a way with people. And we absolutely should. And again, I think, again, going back to my story, one of the things that I think I was just so pleasantly shocked by was how well Christianity did with like the really solid answers that Christianity has for life's biggest questions. Right. I think we have really, really compelling answers to the big questions of life. And the shame of it is that a lot of people just couldn't answer some of these questions. They just haven't thought about it or don't know. But man, when you get to that place where you've kind of drank deeply in these sources and wrestled with them yourselves and walked through it, and then somebody asks you, hey, what do you think about the problem of evil? And again, not debate setting, but a dialogue setting. That is just, I think, a very powerful apologetic to just walk through, hey, in my own life, I've struggled with it in the following ways, and here's the answers that I've kind of come out with. And what do you think? And as they say, and having follow-up questions and trying to clarify and letting them ask you questions and just having that back and forth. Like I said, it's just good fun, and it's really powerful in our lives.
It's interesting as you talk about Twitter versus just being in person and coffee, because one of the reasons we started this podcast was we used to have classes and they actually went terrible. Like I would get the emails, and what's funny is we've talked a lot about the topics we talked about in those classes. And there's a part of me that wonders, like, with this format, if allowing someone to have the longer form conversation and listening to it, people are more open. And there's two listeners, Mike and Carla. They tell me, they're like, yeah, we listen to the podcast and sometimes we pause it and we start fighting with each other, but we love Mike and Carla. But where I kind of want to go with that is, there's a gentleman who he sent me a Twitter message about 7 years ago, and he said, why did God kill people in the Old Testament? And so I said, hey, I can't answer this on a DM. Let's have coffee. So I sit down with him, and, I want to give credit to the Holy Spirit, because as I was getting to know him, I was listening to him, and I just said, hey, where did that question come from? And he's like, I've been divorced 2 times. I've had 2 affairs. And I guess I'd be curious if in your experience, and even our episode title, Why Ask Why, like if we're not asking the deeper why, because it's like, hey, why do you care so much about the Old Testament, like people being killed? And it's like, oh, there's a direct line. And I think the way I want you to kind of answer that is, before we started recording the show, you had talked about personally, you were having all these questions. I think you mentioned you were in a long distance relationship. You lived in like a back shed of a church or something like that. You're studying all of that. Like, how do we even go deeper to the why of, hey, can I listen to my life right now that maybe this question isn't about the question?
Yeah, that's really, really good, because I think it's very, this goes back to the point made earlier, just that, though we are intellectual beings and the intellect is important and rationality is crucially important, there's almost always more going on than just that. And if we're honest, I think that's, a lot of times people will make that point on the atheist side, that there's almost always some hurt somewhere. It's a pastor or an overbearing parent who, raised the kid in the church and whatever, and that it's almost always some, or dad's MIA, something to that effect. But I think also too, like on the Christian side, I think, there's probably, if we're honest, again, there's lots of reasons why we come to Christ that probably go far beyond any sort of intellectual thing. So, and that's just to make the point that we almost never just ask these questions in the total abstract, the way in which the question reads. And I think you make a really great point, especially with something like the Old Testament violence and so on. And there's a legit question to be asked there. That's an intellectual question, and it too is a chapter in the book. But anyway, right. So, and that's another one that I definitely have, sort of wrestled with as well. But yeah, sometimes there's so much going on underneath that if we don't address what's going underneath, we can address the question all day long, and never get to that, to really the core of it, the real why question. And so, yeah, I think that, I think that's where that dialogue setting is just so important, that we're not just talking about, kind of having an intellectual exchange, but there's a kind of friendship there that we can know that person, know what's going on in their lives, and kind of get down to that deeper level. I think that's really, really great.
Did that happen for you in your season of doubt? Did you have people that like you reached out to that you felt, you're commuting alone, you're living alone? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, for me, I didn't really. In fact, I did this quite a lot by myself. That's probably one reason why I emphasize the books and the broader community like I do, because for me, again, I think doubts just make us feel lonely to start with. There's some sort of loneliness often attached with it, where we feel like we've sort of stumbled on this smoking gun that nobody else has found or whatever, and why isn't anybody else struggling with this and that kind of thing. But I really went at it alone, so in my own story. So I went at it with books, and this is sort of, the internet was around, but it wasn't like it wasn't YouTube, I don't think, at that in 2003. But I did have, a lot of, this will really date me, but lectures on tape. It was actually cassette tapes, which that was a little outdated, to start with. I'm not even sure my car had a tape player at that point. But anyway, I listened to these. I guess I don't know if I had a walk. I don't know how I listened to it, to be honest. But and I just had all these apologetics tapes, and I listened to all of them, and multiple times. And so for me, it really was more that. But sort of in that journey, I definitely had to dig into kind of my upbringing and the experience in the ministry, because there's some dark moments in my family's journey in that, as again most families have that have been in the ministry for their kind of lives and careers and things. And so that was definitely a big part of it for me too, was like, I don't know that there was a lot of direct connections to the exact doubts that I was having, but it was really, I think, if I could say it this way, I think it was making my faith my own, rather than just sort of borrowing, the faith of my parents or the faith of my family in a way. And so I think digging into kind of that sort of broader emotional sort of junk, if it was definitely part of that side of it. Yeah.
Is there someone along the way that you've, through your studies or the work you're doing now, who you have found who maybe you feel like there's a question in you, or maybe your students have felt there's a question in them and they're looking for the right way to ask it, or is there someone who's asked good questions that it doesn't have to be someone you've met, but like a book that you've read? Or you mentioned C.S. Lewis. I'd love to know, like, if there's a book you recommend there, but are there other people who have gone before who can help us frame questions and get us on the right path when we want to ask why.
Yeah, I think any C.S. Lewis is good. He's kind of in that world where he was so captivated by Christianity. Really, it's the truth, goodness, and beauty of Christianity. That's the kind of moving on from the intellectual and the rational that even the Chronicles of Narnia and places, I think that's always kind of what he's about, is sort of pointing people to the truth, goodness, and beauty of Christianity in a way. And so I think any C.S. Lewis is good. One book that I have definitely that was helpful for me along the way, it kind of came a little later, but I just loved it, was Tim Keller's book, The Reason for God. Is a good one. He spends the first half of the book talking about the objections he's gotten over the years as a pastor in New York City, with these sort of kind of elite, minds, just top business people and professors and university people and so on. And so I think he just deals with it really well in a really accessible way, in a real sort of pastoral way. So I think that's a good book for sort of pursuing these things. Another book that I think is really good is Rebecca McLaughlin, I think it is, called Confronting Christianity. And she does a similar thing where she lays out certain questions and that sort of thing that need to be answered. So those are some resources.
That's great. Thank you.
Wow, we've had a lot of fun. And just a reminder, we're suggesting resources next to Tim Keller, Rebecca McLaughlin, Travis Dickinson, Wandering Towards God.
Yeah, don't forget. Let's don't forget the book that we're talking about today.
That's right. So, hey, segues are for rookies. So you can use the code WhyGod. It'll give you a discount at IVP Press. We'll be sharing that link. So, Travis, we close every episode with a question, and the question has to do, what does Jesus have to say about asking why? So the good news is, just like a great professor, Aaron and I are going to answer this question, and then you get to clean up whatever mess. Does that sound good?
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Very nice. Yeah. You get to be the professor who cleans up what we do, not just leave us flailing. That's good. Do you want me to start, Peter, or do you want to?
You were in a role, man.
Okay. Well, I love this conversation, and I loved that you brought up C.S. Lewis. By the way, he's one of my favorite authors, also. And what would Jesus have to say about this? I think that our Jesus wants us to be asking questions. How many times in the course of his earthly ministry did he ask people questions or turn questions around and make people think in different ways? I don't think God is afraid of questions. In fact, I think he wants us to ask questions. And I loved how Travis was talking about how questions don't mean we just throw everything out the window, or all of life has to stop on a dime. It's something you can wrestle with. And I think God wants us to investigate. He wants us to investigate the world around us. He also wants to investigate ideas and things that he's put in place. So I think that I don't think Jesus is afraid of questions is what I think. And I loved. I'll just throw in too my little plug too. I love. I thank you that for your book here. I'm really would love to dig in more. Also. I love that you mentioned C.S. Lewis, because I love that book, Mere Christianity. I think that's a place where a lot of, at least a starting point for
that's a good
some of these questions too. Yeah. So, anyways, Peter, go ahead. We'll let the pastor clean up me, and then the professor can take it from there.
He's like, I'm already cleaning up for all the ways pastors have messed up students. But so currently I'm reading this book called Risen Indeed by my friend Austin Bush, and it's about the book of Mark, and I don't think many people know this. They actually added verses on at the end of Mark because it just ends with, there's no clear resurrection or something like that. You have to read it for yourself, the book of Mark. You can read Austin's book too, but, he talks about one of the founding premises of Mark is this this man is asking for his son to be healed, and Jesus asks them,
Yeah.
hey, do you want your son to be healed? And he's like, I believe, but help my unbelief. And I just bring up that glimpse of Mark because there's a whole lot more textually that scholars, but I just want our listeners to know, like, the Bible assumes us asking the tough questions. The Bible assumes us doubting, and I'll dare say, like, the Bible assumes even a little bit of deconstruction, because the premise and this idea of even this gospel of Jesus is, like, the author seems to have a lot of questions, and if there's any religious system or faith tradition that should be encouraging why, it's Christianity. We live on the basis of, like, these two theological points that Jesus was born from a virgin and he was raised to dead. I mean, if you can't go with the deeper questions and kind of doubt that, what are we doing here? And so I want to leave our listeners with why ask why, because Christianity welcomes it.
That's great. I think you guys did a good job. So let me just add to, not need to clean up anything. Yeah, the interesting thing too with that passage that is, is a classic, I believe, but help my unbelief. The cool thing is too that Jesus indeed helps his unbelief. He heals his son, and so on. And so, I do think that that's right. That you see a real difference. Maybe I'll put it this way: you see a difference in Scripture of questions that are asked to make trouble or sort of be, in a way, I in the book, I put it as being a skeptic, and that word can mean a lot of different things. But what I mean by it is when we are just asking questions, either to ask questions or to avoid ever believing anything. That's the sort of skepticism that I have in mind there. And I don't think the Bible has, definitely doesn't recommend that, but the sort of honest crying out to God, how does this make any sense whatsoever kinds of questions are really from cover to cover. And I mean, you read the book of the Psalms, and I mean, the questions that are asked are like, God, where are you? Like, where are you in this? Like, there's this deep suffering, or I'm at the mercy of my enemies, and where are you? And it's these really difficult expressing and articulating these really, big questions. And I don't get the sense that that's wrong to do. In fact, that's the kind of point, is that we're coming to God in need of his answer, in need of help my unbelief. And there's other people in Jesus's life in ministry that were asking questions that were just trying to trip him up or trap him. Of course, the Pharisees and others, and he didn't have a lot of patience for that, of course. But those that asked honest questions, like the Mark passage and other places, Jesus will stop everything at times and try to help in a way. And so. And then I love the passage in, I want to say it's Jude 1:22, where Jude tells his audience, the church, to have mercy on those who doubt. And what's interesting about that too is the context of that passage, because earlier in the passage, he's condemning these sort of troublemakers. I mean, with the strongest language you could possibly imagine. He's like equating them with Sodom and Gomorrah and, this stuff. And then at the end of it, he says, but have mercy on those who doubt, and says, to him who is able to cause you to stand firm, and so on. And I think it's a beautiful picture. And I think he probably has something like doubters in mind there, in that great sort of admonition and so on. And so, yeah, I think Jesus specifically, he welcomed those who were intellectually curious. And maybe just a way to close it off, when Jesus was asked himself, what's the most important command? What's the greatest commandment? And again, that was intended to be a challenge, and it is sort of a challenge because if you've read the Old Testament, there's lots of commands, and so Jesus is being told to pick one, and it's trying to trap him with whatever he would choose. And he says, with seemingly without hesitation, he says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and notice with all of your mind." And so one of the things that I think was most meaningful for me in writing the book, to be honest with you, is that I think there really is a certain posture we should have as we do this, and as we ask questions, why ask why, like as we ask the why questions. And the posture, as we see in that commandment, is one of love. And I think sometimes we think, how is love and questioning? How do we put those together? Well, I teach here at Dallas Baptist University, and every, freshman semester, you just see these couples, popping up all over the place where, these guys and girls have fallen in love, and all they want to do is like just stare at each other, ask questions, and know everything there is to know about each other. You can barely, there could be a car crash like 2 feet from them and they don't even notice it, kind of thing. Right? They're so deeply intellectual, there's lots of ways in which they're curious, but like intellectually curious, that they are loving with their hearts, souls, and minds. And I think the invitation there, if I could put it that way, is that we would pursue God with all of who we are, because it's heart, souls, and minds, not just our minds. But that should be a big part of it, is that we're asking these deep and difficult questions. Again, not as skeptics, not trying to trip God up, not trying to not believe, but to find truth in the pursuit of the knowledge and relationship coming out of a place of love. Like that's way different than the, what we might have in our minds is this like skeptical person who's just trying to be a nuisance. Why should we ask questions? Precisely because we love God. Precisely because we're in pursuit of him and want to know him in this deep and full way.
Wow. So friends, make sure you find the book Wandering Towards God by Travis Dickinson. And then you can use the code WhyGod for a discount at IVP. We'll be sharing that with you. Travis, where's the best place people can find you?
Probably my website is the best. It's just my first and last name.com. So Travis Dickinson, and that's DICKINSON.com. And you can kind of get all and I blog there and have a newsletter and things like that. And there's even a free book download that they can get if they sign up for my newsletter. So,
well, there you go. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Our website is whygodwhypodcast.com. You can click the subscribe button. You can get this episode and many others. Thank you so much for joining us today.